Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
Aloha, everyone.
All right, Russ. So we've gotten pretty deep into rookie and Devy talk the last couple weeks. Free agency is upon us, just a day away now. What do you say you and I look at the various storylines of free agency and how that will affect all of our dynasty teams? Because there's some pretty significant movement going on out there that I think we're all going to have to pay attention to. So.
Right. I think instead of sort of going deep into the microscope, we're tuning out a little bit, sort of looking at players that will legitimately have impacts this year. I think that's important.
That will actually play on your roster, and you will actually start them this year.
I think that's an important concept at times.
It is.
So yeah, we're looking at some pretty interesting free agency stuff that, I mean, we're probably going to lead off with a pretty big one here, but it seems like there's some pretty big moving parts right now.
Well, yeah, so that's the, I think, operative term is moving parts. So before we get to legitimate free agency issues and questions, let's get to a couple of non-free agent moves, Russ. First, literally quasi-breaking news, DeMarco Murray on the verge of being traded to the Tennessee Titans from the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are just clearing house today, man. They're getting rid of Byron Maxwell, Kiko Alonso, and now presumably DeMarco Murray. So first question, Russ, the obvious question, what does this do to Tennessee's offense? Are you thumbs up or thumbs down?
Well, first of all, they're just going into all of Chip Kelly's Google Docs and clicking undo. So I think that's a pretty interesting storyline to follow, just how quickly they're undoing all of the moves he made last year. But yeah, no, I mean, this is intriguing from a Murray standpoint. He didn't look that great last year, but you'd have to think with Tennessee, it's going to be a little bit different of a scenario there, especially with Mariota and his sort of running element to help him sort of ease that running game. So that'll be interesting. I do like that. Probably not as much as I'm probably not going to be as high as some people on him, just because I'm not sure he's still that feature back that we saw a few years ago. But definitely intriguing. And what this does for Ryan Matthews potentially is the more interesting storyline for me.
Yeah, so let's talk about that real quick. I mean, look, Ryan Matthews, I think, proved to be the more effective runner, at least in a vacuum last year, compared to DeMarco. I mean, his yards per carry was much higher. Didn't get as many looks, obviously, because he wasn't the $42 million man that Murray was. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the Eagles would much rather roll with Matthews and not pay Murray than have both of them and sort of have a competition between the two. So. Yeah, it's the Eagles thing, I think, is more interesting to me at this point than the Titans. I mean, the Titans, it's obvious what they're doing. They're trying to get as many competent pieces around Mariota as possible, and that's fine. But the Eagles, man, I mean, they re-signed Bradford, which we haven't even touched on yet. They now ship off Murray and are left with Ryan Matthews, and then obviously they've got the holdovers at receiver, Matthews and Aguilar. I don't know, man. That's a super young, well, not necessarily young, but I don't know. What's the term you would call the Eagles offense if you had to pick a word right now?
Man, I don't know, but so and especially with Ryan Matthews, I wouldn't go too overboard with that either, because we don't know what they're going to do in the draft yet as well. So if they address the running back position, I'd imagine both his dynasty and redraft and MFL 10 ADP is going to skyrocket after today. So I'd use a little caution when thinking about Ryan Matthews right now. But yeah, I don't know. It's pretty bizarre how this last few years has gone for them.
Yeah, and just let's circle back to the Titans real quick. Last year, Russ, sadly, according to our own PFF, the Titans had the 29th best offensive line last year. So, yeah. But I mean, look, it's very possible they used that number one pick on Lewin. Am I saying that right, Russ? You're the draft expert.
Laramie Tunsil from Mississippi.
Yeah, Lewin they already have. Duh.
And But I think a lot of what we've seen the past few years is that just because you draft an offensive lineman high doesn't mean he's going to be an impact year one. So he could be, but I still think that's a bit of a wild card for year one. Again, I think the rushing element of Mariota is nice, but it's not a guarantee, you know. And the Titans are obviously not too stable, so.
Yeah, that and you almost run the risk with Murray anyway of kind of letting the hype train, get out of control with that, because everyone's thinking, oh, fresh start. He's got Mariota at quarterback now. But like you said, he had a really bad year last year. I mean, by his standards, 3.6 yards a carry, only one 100-yard game, 6 touchdowns, which was his lowest in 3 years. And now, Russ, he goes to an offensive line that was literally one of the worst in the league. So I think, if somebody is just super anxious to jump on that Murray bandwagon, I think you let them. But I think I'm tapping the brake on that for now.
Yeah.
All right. And lastly, what does this do, Russ, to the Titans running back depth chart? I mean, it was kind of a, what's a nice term to describe that?
A poop show.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. That's the PG term. Which, don't get me wrong, I think Murray makes the depth better, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's still good. So let's just play this game. Who's the odd man out there? You got Antonio Andrews, David Cobb, and then everyone's favorite, Bishop Sankey. Of those three, who is most likely to seen his last days in Tennessee for you, Russ?
I think they're all going to get a chance in camp, but I really think that Bishop Sankey is the likely one to get cut there. I just think in terms of wearing out your welcome, that's kind of what's happened there. We'll see if he gets another shot. I'm sure he will somewhere. But, definitely not a good start to his career.
Well, no, and he was deactivated for most of the end of last season anyway.
Yeah.
So I think you're right there. I think he'll be the odd man out, which, it's somebody should do a case study on Bishop Sankey as far as dynasty drafts and rookie drafts go, because he was at one time the top-rated running back in the draft class a couple years ago, and now he might not have a team. So
he's a pretty peculiar case because he just – if this is how his career ends, he just couldn't play. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty rare to see sort of a second-round pick, like not really even get on the field, just be totally overtaken by undrafted free agents and the like of Dexter McCluster. So, that's pretty startling.
McCluster won me a playoff game or two last year. Take it back. But yeah, it's an interesting case, and that could be potential article idea for you and I on the Pro Football Focus website. But enough of the Tennessee trade, Russ. Let's get to some official news. At long last, Peyton Manning has made it official. Not to be redundant, he officially retired today. I think we can. I think the jury is pretty much set on Peyton Manning towards the end of his career anyway. He just wasn't good. But again, we all knew that. The bigger question, at least from a dynasty standpoint, which is why we're here, what does this do to Brock Osweiler then? Is his best shot to succeed in Denver and taking over for that team? Or is his best shot somewhere else and, starting over like a Houston or the Rams or something like that?
Initially, at first glance, I kind of assumed that was the direction they were going. And I kind of put him in roughly as the starter for their next year. But the more you hear and the more that comes out, it seems like maybe they're going to be moving in a different direction, maybe signing a free agent or addressing it in the draft. So, if they do that, I'd say that's a nail in the coffin in terms of his NFL starting quarterback career. But yeah, he's proven he's at least a backup in this league. If he does get the starting quarterback spot in Denver, I think that's a nice situation, and he can be sort of that low-end quarterback 2 next year. But, not too much to get excited about either way.
Yeah, and I think you and I agree. That's probably the more likely scenario, at least as it pertains to Osweiler. But Let's assume he does go back to Denver. What does that do to the players around him, Russ, as far as their dynasty value? I mean, I think probably, the cream of that crop is Demaryius Thomas. But, I mean, is it fair to say Demaryius Thomas probably won't reach the numbers he had under the Peyton years of a couple years ago?
I think no, I don't think he's going to ever get back to sort of his apex prime type numbers again. But I mean, this year he had 180 targets and 1,300 yards. So I mean, he's still a bell cow of sorts. So do I see him getting 180 targets again? Probably not. I'd say it'd probably stabilize around 160, somewhere around there, maybe 150. But I mean, I think he'll stay around that 1,300 yard total, at least for the next few years. So even with Osweiler there, he seemed to do fine when Osweiler was playing this year. So him and Sanders, I think, will be fine.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, and look, if you can snag Thomas for, something around wide receiver 2 level as far as value goes, I think you do that because I think, look, the skill's still there, just a matter of who's going to get him the ball and how often, So, yeah, that'll be interesting, though. I mean, I think the last time the defending Super Bowl champions had a question mark at quarterback may have been the Trent Dilfer Baltimore Raven days of 2000. I think that's the last time, though, right? I mean, we haven't had any question about a quarterback on a defending Super Bowl team since then.
It's pretty much been Rodgers, Brady, Roethlisberger, Flacco, Manning. That's pretty much who wins all the Super Bowls. So
right, yeah.
And Russell Wilson. So yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so that'll be tricky. It'll be a very interesting offseason, that's for sure. All right, Russ. So those were two of the bigger news and notes from today, actually. But let's get into some free agency talk and how this is going to affect yours and I's and everyone else's dynasty team. I would say probably the biggest name out there, not necessarily the best player, but the biggest name would have to be RG3, Robert Griffin III. Washington officially putting his tenure to an end. He's a free agent. He is free to go anywhere he would like, or to any team that would like to sign him. I guess first question, Russ, what is the ideal scenario for Robert Griffin dynasty owners? I mean, obviously it would be a starting job, but where could that potentially be for you?
Man, it's really tough. All I know right now is that I want him to go to a stable situation. I don't want him to go to a bottom tier team. I think he's proven to be a little fragile in terms of starting quarterbacks and his psyche. I mean, I just look at what happened in Washington, and I don't think it was a good situation, but I also think he added to that. So when you look at it from that standpoint, you definitely want a place that's stable. I look at a place like Houston.
I was gonna say Houston too. So
you have DeAndre Hopkins there, who can pretty much make you look good no matter what, as long as you can get it in the same realm that he is. And I think they have a pretty interesting defense, a nice stable defense that can hold games down for you. And you have Bill O'Brien, who's shown he can develop quarterbacks at both college and the NFL level. So I think that's a nice spot for him. And I would love it if he got to the Rams. I mean, another good defense, another sort of strong running game. I think that's a place where he could go and he wouldn't be asked to do too much. So I'm looking at spots like that. But yeah, as long as he doesn't go to like a bottom 5 to 10 team, because I could just see the same thing happening all over again,
Well, and I agree with you completely. I think, to me, Houston would be a top choice. Like you said, that's probably the most stable situation as far as, the coaching staff and the front office. And yeah, I mean, the players around him are pretty good with Hopkins and Watt and Clowney on defense. The Rams, I mean, they have an obvious need at quarterback, right? I mean, that much is clear. But, if stable is the thing you're going after, I still don't know how to this day Jeff Fisher has lasted this long. I think a lot of people would say the same thing. And I almost feel like he's at the end of his rope. Like he needs to either, have a 9-7 or 10-6 season this year with whoever the quarterback is, or he's done. Because look, they're moving into that nice new big stadium the year after. I can't imagine if they do another 8-8 season that'll fly. They're going to want to make a splash. And I don't know, man. I would not. I mean, he would get playing time with the Rams for sure, but I don't know that would be best for his long-term health and skill, let's say.
Fair enough. I think the bigger point here is that he is going to get another shot to start somewhere.
Sure.
That is not in question. And when you look at his dynasty ADP right now, I mean, he's not going undrafted, but he's going in 17th to 20th round of startups. So even in 1 QB leagues, I mean, and especially in Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues, that's someone you just want to get for his potential value increase, even if you don't like him.
So let me throw another team out there, Russ, and let me get your instant reaction.
All right, ready?
Cleveland.
Oh, no.
What? Oh, hear me out. Hear me out.
Okay.
You got Hugh Jackson.
Okay.
Now. Okay. I think he's fairly respected as being a pretty good coach. I mean, his 1 year as head coach in Oakland, his full year, he went 8-8 with a really, you could say questionable personnel on his team. He was the offensive coordinator for Cincinnati for a few years. I mean, led Andy Dalton to the best seasons of his career. They have an obvious needed quarterback. Not to say they won't draft one at 2. I mean, I think it's possible they draft one and still have Griffin. But you've got Josh Gordon in all likelihood coming back. You've got a decent option out of the backfield, at least on passing downs, and Duke Johnson, I think.
And a really solid tight end in Gary Barnidge. So, okay.
Yeah.
You know what?
Look, they've got a lot of cap room. I mean, they have more than even the Rams and the Texans. So they can afford to make a splash with that and give him an opportunity. Because, look, I don't think, McCown is going to be the starter next year. Manziel is all but gone. And given, I understand it's another poop show, we'll say, in Cleveland most of the time. But, look, it may be a match made in heaven. Who knows?
Cleveland is a bad situation, but I do have a lot of respect for Hugh Jackson. So I do believe he will turn that offense around, whether it's next year or the next 2 years. So, okay. I don't hate that. I actually might like that a little more than the Rams. Because
I was going to say, I would almost, if I had to pick an order, I would almost put that in front of the Rams. I really would. Because I don't think Jeff Fisher, I think Hugh Jackson is a better head coach than Jeff Fisher. Let's say that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And you've got Gurley in St. Louis, obviously. So you are not, you don't have a lot of pressure, but you also don't have anyone to throw it to there.
Right.
As opposed to Cleveland, which in all likelihood is getting Gordon back. You've got Barnidge in his renaissance of a career. So, that would be a fun one. I would be excited about that one. But, all right. And I think, we sort of know what this does to the Redskins. Kirk Cousins, he's the man. Mm-hmm. Colt McCoy, he's the, if there was ever any doubt before as who the backup was, there isn't anymore. So does this do anything for you on the Redskins this year?
It's just pretty incredible how that situation worked out. I mean, I remember the day Cousins was drafted, I think it was Gruden that made a big deal about drafting a backup.
No, it was Shanahan. This was Shanahan because he got drafted the same year as Griffin.
Yeah, and there was one person making a big deal about it, and everyone kind of was just like, oh, stop it. He's not going to ever overtake Robert Griffin. And here we are.
And you know what? And I will say this, too. I think you got to give credit to Jay Gruden. He made a really bold call in going with Cousins over Griffin. I mean, that wasn't the easy choice.
No.
To essentially bench the team icon at that point. And look, he benched them, and they made the playoffs. Now, they didn't go very far. They weren't very good when they got to the playoffs, but they made the playoffs. I mean, that's a gutsy move. I think Jay Gruden bought himself a couple years in Washington just for that alone. So.
Yeah, but back to Cousins real quick. I actually don't hate the situation. Love how Jordan Reed emerged last year. I think Deshaun's a great deep threat still. There's just a decent amount of weapons there, so.
I think so. I mean, look, I think Cousins could top out on that sort of fringy quarterback 1, quarterback 2 level. I mean, tops, yeah. Not with regularity. I mean, and look, in a 2 quarterback league, if he's your second quarterback, then even better. So, All right. Let's get to another name first, Russ, before we analyze an entire position. Marvin Jones appears to be the top-rated receiver available in free agency. Had a couple good years in Cincinnati. I mean, obviously was not the preferred target. That would be Mr. A.J. Green. But Jones hits the free agent market. You know what? I'll ask the same thing I asked about Griffin, Russ. What's the ideal scenario for Marvin Jones? He's going to get paid somewhere. What would be best for him to sort of ascend the dynasty rankings, if you will?
Man, I saw a tweet earlier that he's looking for Golden Tate type money. And I think Marvin Jones for quite a few years was looked at as sort of the underrated wide receiver in Dynasty. Everyone kind of accepted that, yeah, he's a good player. He's probably underrated. But if he gets a decent contract and his ADP starts to rise a lot, I'm probably going to be out just because he's a good player, but I see him as sort of a lower end second option in a passing game, and I'd say optimally used, he's a third option. So I don't know where he's going to end up, but I really think he's best served as a third option in a receiving game.
All right, so let's look at some of the teams that have the cap space to sign a Marvin Jones outright. You've got the Jaguars with the most cap space. I don't think they have any need, obviously, to do that. The 49ers are an interesting team that could go there. I mean, they've got the second most cap space. They, obviously still need more weapons. I mean, Torrey Smith did not do it. And let's face it, I don't think Torrey Smith, he's not going to fill that wide receiver one role there. He's just not. So is that a good fit, Marvin Jones there? I don't think it is.
No. Well, I look at Torrey Smith. Torrey Smith is a second option in an offense. He's not a first option. So if you sign Marvin Jones, you're basically deciding one of those two players is going to be your top option in the receiving game. And I don't really like that.
That just reeks of another poop show, Russ.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't like that very much.
All right, so after that, you got the Raiders, who don't think they need a Marvin Jones. They've got Amari Cooper. They've got Michael Crabtree. The Bucks, again, Mike Evans, Vincent Jackson, don't need a Marvin Jones. The Giants could be interesting, actually. They've got the fifth most cap space. Word is they're trying to get Victor Cruz his cap number down a little bit. But look, that's a very high-powered offense that needs a lot of weapons, and I think they could probably use one or two more besides Odell Beckham, right?
I would like that a lot, and not just from a real football standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint as well. That'd be a really nice spot for him.
Yeah, I don't think there's any losers in that scenario. I don't think anyone gets their production siphoned off or anything like that.
Right.
After that, you got the Browns, who we talked about. They could go after a receiver. The Titans could also go after a receiver like Marvin Jones and help Mariota out. You've got the Bears, don't really need another receiver. They're pretty loaded at receiver, I'd say. I mean,
yeah,
from top to bottom, with Jeffrey being franchise tagged, Kevin White, who essentially had a redshirt year for his rookie season, and then you still got guys like Eddie Royal and Marcus Wilson as your 3 and 4, so that's not bad. The Rams, they could go the Marvin Jones route. Not that it would be a good idea, but they could.
They just need to get someone in there. So yeah, I actually wouldn't hate that. You got to get something in there. Can't always go for the stars for them.
I think, yeah. And then the Texans, I don't know. They could. It seems like they're better off spending money on a quarterback and a running back at this point.
Yeah.
Though. So anyway, but no, I think there's a couple options in there that could use a Marvin Jones and could benefit pretty well from that. So, all right, Russ, let's round this baby off. At least, let's bring it home a little bit and cover the running back position. Kind of a unique year in free agency wherein you have a lot of options at running back this year. I mean, it's kind of an interesting class. I mean, you've got Matt Forte, who was released by the Bears, or going to be. Arian Foster was already released. And then you've got free agents Lamar Miller and Doug Martin, both coming off pretty solid years this year. So let's just take them one by one. Well, first, let's rank them, Russ, as far as dynasty value is concerned for you out of those four. Forte, Foster, Miller, and Martin. Go.
Yeah, Lamar Miller 1, Martin 2, Forte 3, Foster 4. And let's preemptively say before we even start talking about this, yes, if someone goes to Dallas, they're going to be great. So let's get
No
that
matter
out of the
who it is.
way. Dallas is obviously looking for a running back. So if any of those players goes there, I mean, even Arian Foster, who I'm not that high on at this point because of all the injuries, if he goes to Dallas, sure, sure.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would argue with that one. Well, let's go in order. Your order, Russ. So Lamar Miller, number one, which I think I would agree with. I think Lamar Miller has always been a little underrated. I don't know that he was quite, utilized to his maximum ability in Miami. Quite honestly, I think he could have probably had more carries there and still done pretty well. I mean, look, his career high in carries was 216.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of tread on those tires left. He averaged, his rookie year 4.9 yards a carry, and then 4.0, and then 5.1, and then 4.5. So he's averaging more than 4.5 yards a clip. A decent receiving option out of the backfield. I think I agree. He would be my top running back, dynasty and otherwise. So,
and I believe he's only 24. Like he was really young when he came into the league.
Right. He's 24. He'll be 25 entering the 2016 season. But yeah, he's for all intents and purposes entering his prime. So first, let's get your take, Russ. Where is he as far as dynasty rankings go? Is he a running back 1 for you still? Is he running back 2? Where does he fall on that?
We're in such a transition stage right now that yes, I think regardless of where he goes, he's going to be in my top 10. It's just sort of where in that 5 to 8 range he falls based on where he goes. But yeah, he's pretty safe for me in terms of being a dynasty asset right now.
So, and you mentioned Dallas as an ideal scenario. And like you said, let's just assume Dallas is the best option for any of these running backs. But other than Dallas, what would be a good scenario for you? And it's funny. We don't really have to use the whole cap number. We don't have to see the cap space to see who would fit because let's face it, running backs are cheap. I mean, I'm not saying it's right, but they're cheap. They're not going to go for more than $3, $4, $5 million a year. So pretty much any team could sign one of these running backs and still have plenty of cap space left. So with that said, who has the biggest need and where would Lamar Miller fit the best for you?
I mean, it's really tough to figure right now. I mean, teams like the Raiders sort of, if the Buccaneers let Martin go, which it doesn't seem like they will, but I mean, the Buccaneers, who knows about the 49ers? I mean, maybe the Seahawks bring someone in. It's teams like that are just kind of wide open right now. And again, the Broncos, they showed they aren't very confident in CJ Anderson right now with sort of that tender they placed on him. So, I mean, there's a lot of spots. I don't know which team is going to pay up for him, but I think he'll be able to make an impact wherever he goes.
Well, and you brought up a couple interesting teams, Russ. I think maybe the most interesting team for me would be maybe the Raiders. They don't seem sold on Latavius Murray. And look, they might be only 1 or 2 pieces away, at least on offense, from being a pretty good team,
Mm-hmm.
And they had the 6th best offensive line last year, according to our very own PFF stats. So that would be one to look out for, I think. That could be an interesting one. I don't know. I mean, Cleveland had a pretty good year offensive, or at least offensive line-wise, but, they're losing Alex Mack, or at least he's a free agent. He opted out, so he could go. But, yeah, Lamar Miller, I think, might be good anywhere. I think he may be immune to situations as far as offensive lines or teams go. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, who knows what the Jets are going to do with Chris Ivory either. So I guess it just depends on what Miller's going to take for a contract. If he goes cheaper, I could see more of these teams being interested. But if he wants a big payday, he's probably going to have to go to one of the weaker teams in the league,
Yeah. All right. So number 2 on your list, Doug Martin. And again, let's assume he I mean, look, I think we all agree the best scenario would probably be going back to Tampa, but just for fun, let's assume he doesn't. And yes, Dallas would be his number one choice, but besides Dallas, Russ, and look, I think we can agree, he probably has a little more ability in the receiving game. So you might have to look at some different teams than you would at Lamar Miller, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the Bears view Jeremy Langford. I would like to see Martin in a Chicago type situation, but I think they're a little more sold on Langford than I am. Man, I don't know. Like the Colts would be intriguing. I think Grigson is kind of that crazy where he just keep throwing money at the offense even though they don't need to anymore. And again, I think the Jets are intriguing. And who knows what the Dolphins are going to do. Jay Ajayi, I mean, is perceived to be sort of the next in line there, but I don't really trust that yet either.
Yeah, I think the Colts would be very good. I mean, they still got Frank Gore, which, like, who knows how long that's going to last. But, man, if they had a receiving back in that offense, I mean, and look, like I said, it's not like running backs are going to be that expensive. They're going to be a couple $1 million a year. So, yeah, that would be an intriguing one. Let me throw another team out there for you, Russ. The Panthers, who have, I mean, obviously Jonathan Stewart, but, I don't know that he's necessarily a 3-down back. Could they do kind of a tandem thing with Stewart and Martin there?
That would be, I actually looked at them and sort of, it just depends on how they spend their cap. But like you said, in division, they've seen Martin for a few years. Obviously a good player. So that'd be an intriguing sort of match if they did come to that decision.
That or the Saints, quite honestly. I mean, the Saints had the C.J. Spiller experiment that did not go well. But look, they probably would rely more on the receiving back than any other team would. So
definitely.
All right, I believe you said Matt Forte next, and obviously
Yeah.
Forte, he's at that magic age, 30, where he's at least got 5 and sometimes 6 years on the running backs we just talked about. So. What's a team that maybe could use a veteran for that kind of role and maybe and good could take more of a back seat than the two guys we just talked about?
Yeah, I sort of look at the Texans as a team that could bring him in for a year or two and sort of, I mean, they're not in win now mode, but I think they have a good enough team where if they get a solidified run game, I mean, last year was just an abomination. So without Foster. So I think if you get a Matt Forte in there, that could be really intriguing. I mean, who knows what the Giants sort of, that's an interesting scenario. I mean, Shane Vereen's all right, but I'm not really sold on him as sort of a difference maker or anything like that.
Let me throw a team out there for you, Russ, and we'll get Russell Clay's instant reaction. The Packers.
Okay, I'd be in on that.
They wouldn't need to rely on Forte, at least not initially. I don't think. Doesn't have to necessarily be the first and second down guy. They can have Eddie Lacy just focus on that. But look, he could be an awesome weapon out of the backfield. James Starks, free agent, so not necessarily assume that he'll be back. And again, Forte's price tag is going to be pretty cheap. He's a 30-year-old running back, but look, he's still producing. I mean, he still had a great year last year in Chicago. And look, let's face it. I think Forte would have a good time sort of sticking it to the Bears if he could.
And I will specify again, I view Matt Forte at this stage as a souped-up Fred Jackson. So that's kind of what I see from him in terms of his ability at this point. So I think he could go to a lot of places and be a really strong sort of third down back.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, look, even if that's his specialty, like you said, and he goes the Fred Jackson route, look, if you're in a PPR league and he still gets, 50, 60, 70 catches, okay, then, that's like running for 500, 600, 700 yards. So it's just as good. All right, so without further ado, we will get to Arian Foster, Russ. Another interesting case study, I would argue, where you have a guy that was, the consensus top dynasty, fantasy, whatever you want to league, whatever league you were in player for a couple years there. And then just because of injury, just couldn't put it together and couldn't string a complete season again. Where do you see him? What would be a good scenario for him, dynasty-wise?
I don't think he's a feature back anymore. I mean, Achilles injuries are kind of a touchy subject in terms of football. I think technology has gotten better, but that's still an injury that's very iffy, especially for running backs. He's getting older, so I don't see him as a full-time player anymore, but I also don't think he's going to cost a ton depending on where he goes. So again, he's another sort of win now asset that I could see going in, being a veteran presence, getting 100 to 150 carries, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. He's definitely not going to be a featured back anywhere, at least not, to start the season. But look, he still has that ability, I think. I mean, it's just injuries, tend to get in the way of all that. So, yeah, I think he'll probably sign on as sort of that veteran, backup, veteran presence, maybe, somewhere with a younger running back to give them a run for their money. But look, he's still a decent asset. Now, again, I don't think you should expect him to start this season, but you never know. He could fill in and have a D'Angelo Williams type season. You never know. So, all right, Russ. Well, let's get to the last bit of news on the day, and you can determine if this has fantasy/dynasty relevance. Dwayne Allen somehow getting a lot more money than he probably should from the Colts to re-sign there. I think it's in the neighborhood of like $29 million, which, given not all of it is guaranteed, but still, why run that risk with Dwayne Allen? So I don't know, Russ. Why? Why?
Very peculiar. I don't have a read on this. I mean, it just happened.
Join the club, Russ. Join the club.
I don't think him or Fleener were very good ideas to sort of bring back. I don't think either of them were really like positives to the team. But I think if you were going to bring one back, at least Fleener is that receiving option who's shown to be at least solid in the passing game. I mean, we just haven't seen Dwayne Allen, and after 4 years of his career, it seems like this is becoming a trend where he just can't stay healthy. So he is a good run blocker, so that's an intriguing part of sort of what he brings to the table. But yeah, I don't really get this one. If you wanted to bring in a tight end, I don't see why they wouldn't just draft one in sort of the later rounds or something.
Yeah, even for a guy that can block well, I don't know. Look, maybe this is why you and I, Russ, are not GMs and other people are. But I mean, look, I think the silver lining in all this is he stays with a good offensive team. If they don't re-sign Kobe Fleener, then look, that opens up some opportunities for him.
Yeah, imagine if they re-sign Kobe Fleener too. Oh.
You know what? Then everything they say about Ryan Grigson is true. So I'll just leave it at that. All right, Russ. Well, yeah, free agency is upon us. It should be good times. A lot of guys will be moving, and obviously their dynasty stock will be moving up and down. We will be here, of course, to analyze all of that. But for Russell Clay, I'm Michael Moore, and we will see you next time on the Dynasty Slant.